Perfect. Um, okay, so we're going to talk about, so I'm Gretchen Richards with Dynamic Business Capabilities, where we help business owners run their companies more profitably and more effectively. And so one of the things that everybody is struggling with today is managing change. So let's talk about that. I like to start with this quote that says, I can't say whether things will get better if we change. What I can say is that we must change if things are going to get better, right? And so I like this quote because it highlights the fact of how necessary change is, right? If we didn't have change, then people would just get stagnant. You'd get bored. There would be no variety. The complexity of humans is that we want opposing things a lot of the times, right? So we all want stability, but we all want variety at the same time. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why change becomes so hard. It bumps up against our stability needs. And change can be either, let me go back for a second. Change can be either externally enforced, or it can be an internal change, right? So right now we're having a ton of external change put upon us. We've got the virus, we've got cultural issues, we've got economic issues. It's a lot of stuff coming at us. But there's also like internal change, like when you get to the point like you can't button your jeans anymore and you're like, all right, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to start my own business, or whatever is sort of a self-motivating. But in either one, you can have resistance to that change. So let's look at why the resistance. Where is the resistance coming from? And what it really comes down to is fear. And typically it's fear of one of three things. It's either fear of loss or failure, fear of the amount of effort or the process that it's going to take, or that you just don't have the skills to be able to handle the change, or it's fear of disappointment in results, right? So it's normally one of those three things. And when it's somebody else sort of resisting the change, what that tends to look like is that there's no buy-in for the change, right? And people ask questions like, well, why do we have to do the change? How are you going to change? I don't understand. I'm confused. I don't understand the impact. I don't understand the change. I don't understand what you want from me. Any of that sort of confusion is really a lack of buy-in. And then sort of the what is the for? You know, what are we trying to get out of the change? Now, one thing that's important to note is that not all resistance to change is a bad thing. We've all had change put upon us that wasn't, in the end result, a good change. And so sometimes the resistance is legitimate, right? It's a change that shouldn't occur. Somebody is making a change, a decision to change quickly, and they haven't really thought through all of the ramifications. So you want to manage this resistance to change, but you want to educate yourself and learn from the other people to see if there's something that you're missing to make the change better. Whoops. So let's start with looking at fear first. So fear is definitely going to cause people to hesitate to adopt. If you have fear of loss, the ways that you want to manage that is you really want to highlight and show the benefits, right? So whenever something changes, usually there is an increase in something and a decrease in something else, or some kind of change. So really emphasize, why are you changing? What's the benefits, not only to the company, but to the individuals involved? And then if there really is something that's going away, don't skirt around the issue. Just confront it up front. If people, like, let's say you have to downsize and you're going to lay off a certain number of people, just tell them that. Being honest and being transparent is a way to build trust. Even if you're sharing bad news, people at least, I mean, they're going to get the bad news one way or the other, but at least they'll feel that it's being done in a way that's transparent and that there'd be some level of trust. Now, for the fear of effort or process, again, this could be not only the change is just going to be too hard or too complicated, or it can also be fears about their own skills and whether or not they're going to be able to sort of go with you during the change or make that leap, or so there can be sort of some fears of failure mixed in with that as well. And to address those, you want to really talk about what kind of training or support that these people will have as they're going through a change. And then you want to also have a transition period for adoption, which means like, you're not going to be perfect out of the gate. And the expectation isn't necessarily for perfection out of the gate, right? So it's just like what I was talking about with the video. Like, don't expect your first video is going to be great. Like, you can just toss them away if they're not good. Give yourself or give that other person um, that transition period where they're going to build a new skill if that's what's needed. Um, and let them know that it's okay. Like, mistakes won't be punished. It's okay to be messy. And then the fear of results that disappoint. Um, so this could be anything from Jeff talking about his Facebook ad and not wanting to waste $10 if it doesn't get results, to people not wanting to look bad. They might think that if they try something, it can make them look stupid or bad or silly. They don't want to be shamed. So to kind of counteract this fear of results, you want to try to instill confidence that the change will succeed. You want to, and confidence comes a lot of times from doing. So if you can have little baby steps where people can take like little steps and see results and kind of build momentum and build confidence. That's one way to do it if your change allows you to take it in baby steps. Um, and then one other thing to sort of highlight if you're trying to get people to change is that after the change, it's going to be version 1.0, and you can still adjust until you get the desired results. And so sometimes showing that commitment that we're going to do this, it may not be perfect, but don't worry, we're going to keep investing in it and keep trying it until we get it to where we want it to be. As opposed to, we're going to try it, it's not going to be exactly right, and maybe we'll shift again or shift again. So to give people that confidence that you have bought in and that you are committed and that you will do what you need to do to make the change succeed. Oops. So a lot of times people say, okay, that's great, I'm going to address their fears, but how do I know where is their fear really coming from? And to do that, you have to ask questions. And asking questions is really a skill that we're losing in this social media age. But the beauty of asking like intelligent, thought out questions is that you can really drive the conversation while getting the other person to do most of the talking. And that's what you want to do here. You want to find out, where is their fear coming from? Because they might have legitimate concerns about, the change, and you may need to adjust to lower the risk or lower the negative impact of things. So ask questions like, what are your concerns? What are your concerns is really like, what are you afraid of, or what are you scared of? And people will usually open up and tell you what their concerns are. Or you can ask, what has your experience been, with something like this in the past? That's a great way to find out what their perspectives are, what their beliefs are. It's also, they'll mention the things that are like most important to them. So it's a great insight into the other person. And when you're asking these questions, you want to be listening not only to their response to the actual question, but you want to be sort of figuring out what is important to them, what's their perspective, what are their answers telling you about them as a person. And you can ask things like, what do you think the risks are? Because that'll also say, like, what are you scared of? What are you scared of losing? What are you scared of the results not turning out to be? Um, so so if you're just getting resistance and you don't know why and you don't know where the fear is coming from, have these conversations where you ask them these kind of questions, um, and see what they tell you. So once you understand the fears and you understand what's going on, how do you change their behavior? Um, well, you need to have some ability to influence them to change either their behavior or your behavior if you're the one resisting the change, right? Um, and so to do that, first of all, you need some kind of rapport with them to have influence over them. They need to, in some way, like you, trust you, have some respect for you. Um, and and the previous slide about asking the questions for understanding, that can help build that rapport. If you're asking people about themselves, it shows that like you care about them, you care about what they think. It's a good way to build trust. It's a good way to build that rapport. So for addressing the fears, try to give them a new perspective, right? So if they're worried about fear of loss, ask them, what could the benefits be, or lay out what you think the benefits could be for them. If they're worried about sort of the process or the effort, um, talk to them about ways that you can make it easier. If they're worried about fear of the results, talk to them about different things you could do to manage the risk, um, to try to make sure that the results are good. And then challenge them to grow. One of the things, I'm a big Brendan Burchard fan, and I just mentioned his other course. One of his he has a book called High Performance Habits, and one of the 6 high performance habits is influence. And in the chapter on influence, he gives you a 3-step way of influencing people. And so he says step 1 is that you give them a new perspective, a new way of looking at something, and that's what thought leadership truly is. Um, and then you challenge them to grow. And he says challenge them to grow either in connection, character, or contribution, right? And then the third step is that you role model that behavior. And that's important. So it doesn't come off as that you're trying to manipulate them, but that you're generally giving them solid advice that you would take if you were in their shoes. So to challenge them to grow, there's questions like, I like to think about it this way, right? So if somebody is thinking about something and it's maybe from just a narrow perspective, and you need them to take a broader perspective to see it, the bigger picture, or you need them to see it from like more from the customer's standpoint than their own standpoint, um, then you're challenging them to grow. You're challenging them to look at it from a different perspective that takes more needs into consideration. So that's a great way to do that. I'd like to think about it this way, or you can ask them what would happen if we tried this, or what if we looked at it this way. And all of these questions would be asking them to look at the situation or interact in the situation in a way uh, that's at a higher level than what they're currently doing, in the way that you're trying to influence them. If that makes sense. Are there any questions on any of that? Okay. Um, so then let's talk about buy-in. Um, there's a quote from Deming. Deming is the consultant that went to Japan after World War II and really helped them um, build up their manufacturing with such high quality and be known as high quality manufacturers. And one of his many, many quotes is, people support what they create. And that's very true. So if people aren't, or if they're still resisting, you don't see that buy-in on the change, they're not understanding it, or they just don't want to do the change, um, try to get them in these conversations where you can kind of co-create. Now, a lot of times you can't really get people involved in the actual decision as a business owner or whatever you're going to make that decision, but at least try to get some of their input before you make the decision, and then if that's not possible, then at least get their inputs into how the decision is going to be implemented, especially how the implementation would impact them and their jobs. And for engaging people, you need to go first. So you need to go and again ask some really good, meaningful questions. Ask them, can I run something by you? What do you think of this idea? How would you approach this? How could we do this? What are your thoughts on this? And that gets them to sort of open up and to think creatively. And again, you're communicating that you value them, you value their opinion. It's a way of building that sort of trust and rapport. Um, and if they can, give you some thoughts, and then you can maybe modify those thoughts, and then they can come back and modify it above that. At the end of the day, you can end up with something better than either one of you would have come up on your own. So the co-creating of ideas is something I personally love. I mean, this to me is a great day when you can have that like back and forth and come up with something really good. And then once they feel that level of ownership that they helped create it, they're going to be far more likely to support the solution. So let's step back for a second and look at change as a process. So there are 4 sort of phases to change, and 1 is awareness, 2 is acceptance, 3 is accountable, and 4 is action. And so this process is another place where people sort of fall off the change by buying into the change. So awareness is really when you figure out there's a need to change. You figure out, you just looked at your numbers and you realize you're growing and you're not going to be able to support those numbers of customers without hiring more people. Or or you realize, COVID-19 is here and it's shutting people down and you need to make some changes, right? So some kind of awareness happens that there's needs to be a change, and that you have some idea of um, what benefits you want to get out of the change, even if the benefit is just to minimize a negative impact to your business for something like COVID-19. And then you need acceptance, which is that the current state, if you just keep going, isn't going to lead you to success. This is sort of like the real need, that if I just keep on my current path, I'm not going to get to where I need to go. I really do need to change to get me to somewhere else. And to really look at what are those opportunities, and how good could it be if I do change. And then there's accountability is the third one. And that is really you deciding that you're going to own this change and that you're going to make it happen, and that you're going to gain whatever skills, knowledge, do whatever work's needed, um, that you are invested, and that you're going to push this change forward regardless, that you will be resourceful and you will figure it out. And then action step is really building that momentum, figuring out how to break the change into little pieces, start with some baby steps, build the momentum, look at different ways of reinforcing any sort of new behaviors that are needed. And this is sort of a consistent pattern across changes, um, regardless of what kind of changes that you're going to have. So let's look at one common mistake that a lot of businesses make, which is forgetting to start at the beginning. So what happens a lot of times in businesses is management or the business owner starts at the awareness and the acceptance phase. Like they realize they need to change. They've looked at the numbers and they realize they need to build up. And they've looked at where they want to go, and they realize that their current path isn't going to get them there and that they need to make changes. And then what happens usually is they say, okay, staff, I'm now going to roll out this change, and here's what you guys are accountable for, and here's the actions that I want you to take. And so they've started their staff at step 3. They haven't like backed up and really communicated to their staff the things that they went through in the awareness and the acceptance. And that's where you can get a lot of this initial like pushback, where it's like, wait a minute, what? Why are we changing? What are we doing? What is it that you're trying to like get from the change? So it's important to always remember, and it's really hard to do this in the moment. I mean, it sounds like, oh, well, yeah, of course, but in the moment, it's really easy to just keep going from the point where you're at and not realize that you haven't taken the other people with you. So it's important when you're doing change like this to actually step back and realize that. And if you're having these conversations where you're asking people these questions, it'll help you realize if you did bypass some of the steps. And then for the change how, you really do want to involve your staff as early as possible. Like I said, if you could get their input in the decision making, that's best. You can say things like, I'm thinking about making some changes. Here, these are the reasons why I think things need to change. Here's the things that I'm looking to get from the change. What are your thoughts? Right? And you just leave it pretty broad and open, and you can hopefully get them talking, and maybe they have ideas and insights from their perspective that could really help you make a much better decision. But sometimes, you're making a financial decision and it's really not something that you're going to reach out to anybody else to get input on. But at least when you're looking at how will that decision be implemented, that you get people involved, and you get them co-creating what that's going to look like and how that's going to impact their jobs, so they feel like they have some control. Nobody wants change just sort of forced upon them. So the more that you can get them involved and active and engaged in it, the more ownership they'll have, the more they'll support it. So just to recap, the key takeaways are re- that for resistance to change, a lot of it is about fear of loss, fear of process, fear of not getting the results you want. And to combat that, you need to really understand what those fears are. And then once you understand the fears, you need to try to influence people to overcome their fears and grow and move to that next level. If there's no buy-in, you do want to sort of have that self-check about whether or not it's the right change. But then you also want to do this co-creation solution of asking people to help figure it all out. This takes a lot of pressure off of the business owners too, or where people don't have to figure it all out on their own. You can rely on the other people you work with. And then remember the change steps. There's awareness, there's acceptance, there's accountability, and there's action. And that everybody needs to start with awareness. Um, don't have don't start people at accountability and action. You will lose them. So, any questions?